this music. Anyway, thank you. Thanks for inviting me here. It's good to be here. A couple of thoughts. One is I appreciate the life that you've chosen. You've chosen a life of care, of commitment. You've chosen a life to reduce suffering in the world. And those are no small things. And so thank you for that. Second, I just love coming to Canada, and partly to you, have decided to create a healthcare system that thinks every human being has a right to healthcare. Now, I come from a little different orientation, as you might have picked up over the years. And I felt a little kind of disqualified to come here, especially what's going on in my country. And sorry about the lumber, but we'll work that out, you know. And what you're seeing in the U.S. now, because we're all trying to make sense of it while we're waiting in line to come up here, you know, is the fruition of the private sector, the business perspective. And it's the only way I can make sense of it. And in the U.S., it dominates our culture and dominates who we are. And it's a time of nationalism and isolationism and all of those things. And so you stand for something different. You are something different. And so you chose to healing as a life task, which is not an easy, especially in the beginning. You're part of a system that thinks every person has a right to be cared for by the larger community at some level. And then the third thing you've done is you've taken on leadership roles. And that probably one of the major mistakes you made in your career, because most highly trained professionals don't want much to do with administration, leadership, those people. And so that tells me that you care for the well-being of the whole system. And so I thank you for that, because it's tough to be in a leadership role in a healthcare system. The worst system is an academic system, the hardest, because in higher education, people have little care for the well-being of the whole institution. They're just into their own thing. And so thank you for willing to take on the burden of leadership. The stewardship idea, I wrote a book about it a while ago. To me, it's one of the meanings, you know, it's commonly used as when you raise money in a church. And so stewardship, Sunday stewardship, weekends, let's raise money. We got to raise the money. Jesus is watching, got to raise the money. Some of the speeches you hear are really quite amazing. When I got married once, I went to a Christian church because my wife was Christian. And I went on one of these stewardship Sundays. And the guy says, you know, if Jesus saw how little some of you people gave, he would be nauseated. That was 40 years ago. I can't get out of my mind Jesus suffering from nausea. The larger meaning that attracted me was it's to care for the unborn child, to care for the unborn royalty. And so the idea of stewardship was, we'll run this country, we'll run this place for the sake of the next generation. And to me, I feel that's what this is about. That's what you're doing. That's why you've agreed to be leaders. You've taken on the burden of that. And you do it where you're kind of merging from a professional healing, and then you're into an institutional world. And most institutions, even in Canada, are basically patriarchal in nature. They're small at the top, they're wide at the bottom, and they have certain beliefs. They believe in scale, they believe in efficiency, they believe in consistency, control, predictability, and you can't not see that. And so the belief in patriarchy, it's not just hierarchy, but patriarchy, is what you're trying to bring your compassion, care, and humanity into. And so to me, the leadership challenge is not to make the system work right. There's a lot of energy, and that's called management. So management's job is to create order and structure in the world. So consistency in the world, and that's the management function. That's not a leadership function. The fact you call yourself leaders and not executives and not managers means there's something more that you're here for than create order and structure and predictability. That's needed, but it's not decisive. And in my culture, that's gone rampant. And so the business perspective is is the dominant belief system, consumerism, and that's the modern religion in the Southern Territories. Here it's different. You care about the community, you care about the common good. So I thought what I would do is try to lay out in some way, so what would leadership, stewardship look like, give it form, in the midst of a patriarchal world, because there's no kidding ourselves, that's not going away. And so that's the intent. The other intent I have is to make this hour together an example of what I'm talking about. And so I want to lay out some thoughts and then have us experience that, because this is the first day you come here for 2 days. And you ask, well, why do people come to a conference? And my own belief is that one of the reasons is living in the patriarchal world, living in the craziness of this world that wants consistency and control and predictability and speed and scale and efficiency above all. The performance is a side benefit, but I want consistency above all. It has an effect on you if you are from a compassionate or healing or instinct. And the first thing that happens is you begin to think you're crazy. You think, what's going on here? This doesn't make any sense to me, this world that I see. And so after a while, every pioneer suffers from the vulnerability of madness. You think, well, can't you just relax and accept things as they are? And so you think you're crazy. Second thing, to be a pioneer as you are is experience isolation. Sometimes it feels like they don't get this. People don't understand. They take it for granted. And the third is, the world conspires to make us think there's something wrong with us. And so most high control systems has those as a secondary effect. You're on your own, you're an autonomous person, it's up to you. And we have practices to do that. I don't know if you do performance appraisals, but we do these things called performance appraisals. Do you do them up here? Yeah, so you sit down once a year. Okay, it's one of the most patriarchal, demeaning things in the world for both sides. The only good purpose for a protocol like that is to remind you once a year that somebody owns you. All right? And whatever happened here, it's your fault, and I'm going to go over your weaknesses and your strengths, and this is going to become a growth experience. It's the biggest lie in the universe. All right? And my suggestion to most people is next time somebody offers you the opportunity for a performance appraisal, just say, I pass. You can have it. I know it's required by law, but I don't have to be there. Okay? And so you have all this kind of developmental deficiency. So one of the costs of patriarchy. So one of the reasons to come here is to realize you're not alone. You're not crazy, all right? And there's nothing wrong with you. And at this stage of our lives, not a lot more fixing is going to go on, even if there is something wrong with you. I mean, it strikes me that we still have this huge deficiency. So the part of the patriarchal world, the business perspective, is that people need to focus on deficiencies. And some managers buy this. And they say, oh, I develop people. I'm a people person. Especially guys talk this way. I'm a people person. I grow people. I cultivate human souls. That's just patriarchy with a soft velvet touch, okay? And so this notion that I'm going to help you with you. So part of stewardship as a start is to say, let's focus on what people are good at. So a steward says, I'm here to discover what people are good at. I'm here to confront people with their gifts. I'll stop the discussion of deficiencies and working on those things. And I say that with some experience because I've been working on my own deficiencies for many, 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 many decades. And I'm working on the same ones now as the ones I worked on 45 to 50 years ago. So a friend of mine says, you know, self-improvement is just a self-inflicted form of violence. And so this whole notion, I got to get better, I'm not enough, part of the consumer culture tells you that no matter how much you have, it's not enough. And if that's true, then the statement, no matter how much you are, is not enough also. So part of a stewardship function is to declare and operate in the things that you have control over. The notion of our primary task is help people find out what they're good at and to tell them that. Because right now you have to die before that's spoken. I know when I die, there will be a eulogy. And there will be many people who will forgive me. It's just I'm going to miss it, you know. And just by a couple of days. I was so close to being forgiven. I'm sure I will be, because they're mostly good people. And so there's a lot in this notion. The other thing that stewardship means as an alternative to patriarchy, it's about a communal sense of connectedness. And so the world loves content, especially your world. It loves evidence-based, this or that. And you say, well, the task of leadership is a convening function. The task of leadership is to get peers connected to each other, is more important than bosses and subordinates doing well together. And the patriarchal world, the traditional world, bureaucratic world, call it what you want. I'm trying to be gentle with it because it's true and we're all part of it. We succeeded in it. And it's a competitive world. As soon as you go to school, I got it, first grade, Peter, your job is to do better than these other kids. Before that, I liked learning. Then I got turned into a performer. And when somebody goes from a learner to a performer, you've stolen a bit of their humanity. And so we have all the competitive, and so you say, well, how do we recognize that part of the leadership function is to get peers connected to each other in conversations that matter? That changes the world, rather than bosses and subordinates and the boss-subordinate just reinforces the parent. Most of our management models are great parenting. I own you. I'm somebody. Now hear this. This is the captain speaking. That is all. That's basically the training for management. You get that sentence down, you've got it. And so the alternative is to say, well, in a communal world, which your culture more reinforces than mine, you say, well, peer relationships are the point. And that connection precedes content, so that every time we come together, we got to get connected in some way. And same with this conference. That's why if I stop talking, I want to get you connected with each other. And so these become a different function for leadership, to focus on relationship, to focus on connection, to care about the common good. In the Southern Territories, it's a deeply individualistic culture. And it keeps getting stronger, as if I made it on my own. The idea of I'm autonomous, I'm an independent person, it's all a myth. Nobody made it on their own. And if you say, why are some people poor? It's because they didn't have the support system in the early days that we did. And so you get let go of this. You say, oh, what are the trappings of individualism? You can't stop it. Autonomy can't, but you say, let me keep putting my attention into conversations about the common good, the commonwealth. You have all the language. Your healthcare system, I know that you all have, every system struggles. I know it's too expensive. You know, someday it'll be 150% of the provincial budget. It won't make any difference. We're just going to owe more money that we'll never pay. I don't know why people get so nervous about the budget and everything. It's going to go on, and all that. But you say, well, we're here for the common good. What's good for the commons? That's what you hold. That's the right use of power. So when I wrote the stewardship, I said, well, what's the right use of power? You don't want to deny the power that you have, but you say, how do I use it in service of the whole, in service of the well-being of all of us? And to me, that's a strong, strong idea. And so that's the larger context. So what I want to do is get practical, okay? And the idea is that the leadership function is to do two things, is decide who should be in the room, which is always a complicated thing. See, in my country, we're afraid of the stranger now. We're exporting. The Statue of Liberty is weeping every day now. And so that tells me that we've lost our sense of hospitality. The hospitality is the welcoming of the stranger. And it's a culture gone like-minded. And most of my experiences, I'm treated as a like-minded. And every time I go online to buy something, what bothers me, it says people like you also bought these things, right? And what irritates me is, good point, I like them and I buy those things, you know? And so this notion of, to care for the common good means you are a culture of hospitality inside your, what does that mean? It means when we get people together, we want people that know each other the least to be in the room together. Like-mindedness kills cultures. It kills hospitality. It kills community. It kills quality. And so this idea of life, so you say, no, we create a culture of the welcoming of the stranger. Now, what that means very practically is when you break people into small groups, they're always with people that you know the least. People who know each other well will never be surprised. So if you have to innovate anything, if you have to make tomorrow all different than yesterday, if there's any part of your mandate, your mission, your longing, is to create a future distinct from the past, problem solving won't do it, like-mindedness won't do it. You have to get people who are not used to being together into a conversation of possibility rather than a conversation of problems. So the convening function is, how do you gather people who aren't used to being together? And people will complain. They do it all the time. I run groups, talks, whatever. I say, break into groups, find two people you know the least. And they say, oh no, I came with my friend, we're fine. And I said, I know you're fine. And I go grab them by this will take a while to grab you all by the shoulder. But I say, you can't, because if you're with like-minded people, you'll never be surprised. And I don't care how long you've been together, we don't know who each other are. And so what happens is, since I've been with you a long time, I begin to think I do know who you are. So the thought that I know you is an obstacle to caring for the common good, for hospitality, all the things that you stand for. So it's convening and then getting people in small groups. And the small group is the unit of transformation. So if you want to bring about change, you don't do it. This is nice because it reminds me I'm not alone. But even this is problematic because the back half of the room is lined up in chairs in a row like sardines. Say, welcome to our conference on connection, community, stewardship. Now don't get out of that damn seat because we want order and the fire marshal might be watching. And so you have these funny contradictions in your world where you say, I care about the welcome. And then we still have patriarchal protocols, seating, rooms. And so you start to care about that. So the small group always breaks up the patriarchal protocol. And that's where people get connected. So that's what I thought I would do a couple times with you this morning. If you have questions as we go along, go for it. You don't ask. And we'll have some microphones later. The other notion about community is that the process matters a lot, and it takes a feminine consciousness even in a man's body. And people say, well, in a hurry. See, part of the being in a hurry, part of the saving time, part of the being efficient is always the argument against democracy. It's always the argument against community. It's always an argument against the next generation. And people don't say, no, I don't want to build relations. We just don't have time to do that. That's never true. People have all the time to do what matters to them. I don't care what the story is, even in the acute world you live in, the emergency world you live in. They've got time to do what matters. So time and money are always measures of commitment. So if somebody says, I don't have time, don't respond to the time question. Just say, well, is this something you really care about? And so the small group gives people time and space, and everybody's voice gets heard, all the things you care about. So that's what I thought I would do. And these are, this is how the next generation gets cared for. This is how relationships and institutions. And it turns out that all the research on high performance and quality go along with a community strategy. That's what's so crazy. The patriarchal high control world says we got it, and all the evidence says it's the slowest, most costly way to do the world. And it even goes into your relationship with patients. I want nothing more than to absolve myself of all personal responsibility for my health and well-being. That's my number. When I go to my doctor, I say, Dottie, my health is yours. I don't want to exercise. I love fat grams. I like drinking. So give me something. I'm better living through chemistry. And so even the patient-doctor relationship is fraught, because part of your job as a physician and the physician world is to confront me with the choices I'm making, which are decisive in my health, in the community's health. And this is the hardest part, is to get over this parent-child, even when the child wants it. Now, of course, there are moments in crisis when I want you to take over completely. But mostly you say, and employees are the same way. High control systems do not create cultures of accountability. They create cultures of compliance. And so what you're trying to do is say, how do we engage people in a culture of chosen accountability? Accountability is something people choose. They choose to be accountable for something they've helped create. And so how do we engage as much as we can a sense of co-creation of this place? So you're really confronting people with their freedom. If you say, what's the best leadership? This leadership that confronts citizens, members, employees with their own choices and their own freedom. And at some point in the day, you say, I'm not your mother. Well, what are you going to do about this? What are you going to do about this? What are you going to do about this? And the only answer that's powerful is to say, nothing comes to mind at the moment. And they say, that's not the kind of leader I had in mind. And your response is, well, it's not the kind of leader I had in mind either. So you don't get seduced by people's dependency. Of course, they want you to have the most powerful thing you can do to confront people with their accountability is just say, I don't know. Well, what do you mean you don't know? You run the damn place. I know. Awkward kind of spot I'm in, isn't it? Got it? You just are unseducible. And people complain and whine, and you say, good point. What do you mean, good point? Aren't you going to fix that? Not exactly. And so that's the hardest part of leadership, is to not being seduced by the parental longings of people that work for you and work around you. And the same with elected officials. It's the same thing. Stop calling citizens customers. It just breeds entitlement. All right, I'm not your father. You're partners. We're partners in this together. What do we want to create together? And part of the language of stewardship is to stop. There's certain speech acts that are just more powerful. Like a request is more powerful than a complaint. So anytime someone complains to you, all right, basically they'll be satisfied, but they'll leave the room feeling more helpless than when they came in. And so every time you hear a complaint, you say, could you turn that into a request? And they say, well, I don't know what good, figure that out and let's talk. And so requests are powerful. Possibilities are powerful. Refusal is powerful. In order to be a steward, you have to be willing to say, no, you are not on this earth to meet the expectations of people that report to you, because they're irrational expectations. They want you to handle and solve and carry the world that they can't handle themselves. And so you say, well, so that's kind of the undercore, is to say, I'm not here. And so possibilities, what do we want to create together? Refusal, no. Some great questions we won't get to, but that build community, or ask people in small groups to say, what's the yes? What did we say yes to we no longer mean? I'm a person of my word. No, get off it. Nobody can keep their word all the time. The world changes too much, and so do I. And so you create space for dissent, space for refusal. And when people give you a hard time, you respond by saying thank you. I'm not the answer that you came seeking. That's the hardest thing to do, especially for such compulsively compassionate people like you that chose this life. And then the gifts is another powerful conversation. So that's the larger context. And you do it for the sake of accountability. You can't hold somebody accountable, because sooner or later your hand's going to get off their arm and they're going to do what the hell they want. And so you say, how do we, and giving people choice, getting them connected. People will be accountable to each other much more than they'll be accountable to you. I learned that at an early age. I know how to handle authority figures. I broke a plate once. And my mother said, what happened? I said, nothing. I was about 10. And she said, what's that on the floor? It's a broken plate. I don't know. Did you do it? I said, no. And she said, well, don't do it again. I said, I won't. I learned that. It's been useful for me for 60, 70 years. I can handle authority. Thank you very much for the feedback. I'm working on it, okay? Peers won't put up with that. And so what you're doing is creating a peer-connected system that results in my doing this because I don't want to upset or disappoint my peers. And now there'll always be outliers. There are always some people that don't want to connect. I understand that. But you create the intention, the core body, and say, we're going to do this together. And you're just there as a powerful member of that circle. And that to me, is building something longer term than the moment. So what I'd like to do is break you into groups of 3. And I'd like to do it with some protocol. Okay, the protocol is to find two people that you know the least in this room. It may mean that you have to move, okay? And you want to break up those chairs in a line. I don't know if they're not attached together. Are they attached together? Somebody do some research and let me know. Are they attached? Good. So what I like to do in the back of the room especially is break up those lines, all right? And groups of 3, 2 people you know the least, and then I want to give you a question. Now, one more protocol, one more thing before you break into small groups is don't be helpful to each other, all right? Help, let me have your attention. Help is a form of colonialism. Help means I know and you don't. Help means, oh, when I was in your spot, here's what I did. That's a lie. So don't be helpful. Be curious with each other. Say, well, why does that matter to you? You ready for the question? Here's the question. Let me have your attention, because you're not going to answer the question, but let me say it anyway. What's the crossroads? What's the crossroads you're at this stage of the game? What's the crossroads? See, I like the crossroads questions because there's no way out of it. You want to ask questions where there's no escape. Opinions have no power. What do you think of this? What do you think of that? That's fine for the cocktail hour. It has no power. But what are the crossroads you're at this stage of your life? And then ask people, why does it matter? What's at stake for you? Now, you may not be at a crossroads. You may be at that little point of life where everything's going well. And if that's the case, that's fine. Thank God, for this too shall pass, okay? So take 10 minutes and 3-4 minutes each. What's the crossroads you're at? And face each other. Get away from the tables. Do it now. So let me get some sound. Ready, 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 ready. Can you hear me? Is it on? 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 They're all waving back there. So let me have your attention. Don't move. Let's come on back. Clap once if you can hear my voice. Clap twice if you can hear my voice. So I want to, we've got 2 mics. We've got 2 carriers of mics. Is that true? I'm going to act as if we have 2 carriers of mics. So let me give you another. So this is the architecture of convening. That's what I'm trying to say. So this gives embodiment to these larger caring for the whole. Well, how do you care for the whole? You get people in the room, but then you break them into small groups with people they know the least. How do you get them engaged and connected quickly? Doesn't take long. You ask them questions that are ambiguous, personal, and anxiety-provoking. Got it? Ambiguous? What the hell is that question about? You got it. Okay, isn't that kind of personal? Of course it's personal. That's the whole point. You know, the repersonalization of institutions is why you took this leadership job, among other things. And then it's anxiety-provoking. Well, why would you do something that wasn't? See, there's 2 big lines. One is a line for safety. I want a safe life. And some of you might have started in that. Going to study a lot, go to school a lot, it's a good job. And the safety line is a long line. You got to wait. It takes a long time to get through it. And you get to the front of the line and say, I'd like to be safe. What does it cost me? And well, it costs you your freedom. It costs you dependency. To be safe means that some institutions are going to take care of you, and you'll be fine. Well, what do I give up for that? Well, my own flexibility. I begin to think I need you in order to do well or survive. The freedom line is empty. Okay, you can also choose your freedom. Nobody's in it. And you go to the front of that line and say, how do I get my freedom, my choice? Well, anxiety is the price you pay for freedom. So anytime you're anxious, all right, unless you're neurotically anxious, which we all are, but this is called existential anxiety, real anxiety, based on what's happening in the world, it means you're choosing your freedom. So if you run from the anxiety, you'll never experience a choice and feel you. So that's what's at stake. So the question's anxiety-provoking. So that's the idea. People get connected with questions. They get alienated by answers. Problem-solving drives us apart. Asking questions, being curious, helps us get connected. And it's not that connection is the only point. It's just that the content gets worked faster and quicker from connected people than disconnected people. And that's, in a sense, what this gathering's about. There's also a lot of research that if you care about health, the social capital of a community is enormously powerful. And so a lot of the health casualties in Cincinnati, it comes from a broken community, broken neighborhoods, distrusting neighborhoods. It comes from an economic imbalance. And so a lot of the work we're doing in the community is to say, how do we build social capital? Because I know if people trust each other, and if they have a habit of working together, they're going to be healthier, they're going to make more money, they're going to do better in school, they're going to take better care of the elderly, all the things that we have programs to do really are driven as much by our connectedness and our willing to do something together as they are by all the miracles of science and all that kind of stuff. So now after you break them into groups, you don't ask people to report on what they just talked about, because that's unbearably boring. You don't need flip charts to summarize group discussion. It's a waste of paper. Although you got to do something with all that lumber you won't be selling, I guess. But just kidding. I hope that goes away. And so you don't say, tell us what you talked about. You say, what struck you about the conversation you just had? I want lightning to hit me. We want something to happen. You're here to help transform the world. You wouldn't be here if the world was good enough of what you inherited. The fact you chose a leadership position means you care about something larger, and you still have your practice and your clinical work. But it means that, and so what struck me, so let me ask you, for some of you, take 2 or 3 or 4. What struck you about the conversation you just had? Got it? It also is a stance for self-reflection. The idea that I can learn from someone else's experience is a myth. I can be inspired by your experience, but it's not useful to me. It's spiritually useful, but I can't import your methodology, your way of dealing it. That's why telling somebody, when I was your age, here's what I did, is such a hoax. You know, one is I didn't do it, just a story I made up. And the second, it pretends as if I turned out fine. Oh, that's what you did when you were my age? Well, that's good to know, because I got to find another path, you know. Nobody turns out fine. Life is too complicated for that. You don't turn out fine. And so, let me ask would anybody be willing to share what struck you about the conversation you just had? And there's 2 runners in the back. Anybody feel sorry enough for me to raise your hand and make a fool of yourself? All you have to lose is the respect of your peers, so it's not going that well. It's not a big loss. Stand up if you would, and just to get your voice in the room a little bit. There's somebody. Thank you. Give us your name.
Hi, I'm Marilyn Crabtree from Ontario. What struck me was trying to listen to your directive about not helping.
Yes.
It was very difficult to not help and just listen.
It is very hard. It's almost cruel for me to ask you to not help. But that's a good point. Helping, fixing, ends the conversation. And it pretends there's a solution to life. And so the curiosity is much more powerful. And then the other, what I'd like to say, oh yeah, thank you, give us your name.
My name is Khaled, I'm from Ontario. What struck me here is that some thoughts originally from Argentina, and some thoughts originally from Egypt, and some thoughts originally from the Netherlands spoke the same language and had a lot of common ground. Right. So that is something striking.
That's beautiful. So what people discover when they sit with a stranger is that I'm not as alone as I thought I was. And it's a different kind of listening, and that's great. Anybody else like to say something? Right here is a hand. Let's reward the hand.
Well, it was Dennis from Saskatoon. And it was powerful to follow your challenge to meet people who we have never met. And Alejandra, who is one of the people I met, I came away from listening to her realizing how simple my life had been and how she's overcome challenges, moving from one country to another to pursue a dream focused on both her passion and the common good. And it was, and she had to redo her residency, as we often make people do who come from another country. She's just redone her residency, and she's one of the young people of her profession here starting into a phase of life which offers wonderful opportunities. I'm near the end of that, but it was just energizing. It was energizing to hear her story.
Thank you for sharing that. That's beautiful. It allows you to experience gratitude all over again. You want to say anything to defend yourself? No. I'm not that good. So a couple other thoughts. So in dealing with this connection, community, and it's about story. Somebody else want to say something? I'm sorry, the spot's in my eyes. Thank you.
I'm John Ronsley. I work in Burnaby, British Columbia. And what struck me about our group is that we have relatively senior people in the threesome as well as very junior, and the senior people really didn't have any solutions for the junior people to deal with their problems.
That is headline news. What a relief. Save me from senior people who have answers. Save me. Thank you, God. So people's story, what you're trying to do in the leadership is any change is really a reconstruction of a narrative. So every institution, every culture, every department has a story about itself. Here's who we are, here's what we did, And I heard a wonderful quote from Russia once. It said, in Russia, even the past is unpredictable. And that thing just kind of landed on me. And in Russia, even the past. And I thought, it's true about Russia. It's true about me. That I have a story about how I got here. We all have a narrative we have. And I like the notion that that narrative is really an act of useful fiction. And basically the work in changing systems or organizations is to help people reconstruct the story that's more current and has more possibility. Because everybody, and especially where I work in the poorer areas of Cincinnati, they're wedded to their story, and we reinforce it by labeling them. We think there's such a thing as a homeless person. There's no such thing as a homeless person. There are people who don't know where they're sleeping tonight, but that's not who they are. There's no such thing as a poor person. I will not be defined by my average annual income. Only in a consumer religion culture would we dare call anybody and let them be defined that way. And so part of the work is that people have been told who they are, what they can and can't do. Part of people finding their freedom is to confront the expectations, especially earlier in their life, because parents have children for a very specific reason. And the reason you have children, and I've been involved with 6, is to have people who will live out your own unfulfilled dreams. That's why you have kids. The rest is just not worth it, okay? Now, everybody says, I just want my children to be happy. Give me a break. You don't want them to be happy. You wouldn't talk about them that way or treat them that way. You want them to be performers. All right? And so at some point you say, I'm not the son you had in mind. I'm not the daughter you had in mind. At that moment, maturity. And so in some ways, your work as a leader is to help groups of people say, well, that's the story that got us here. But it was a narrative that we constructed, and it was useful for a while, but now what's the story we want to reconstruct about healing, health, and community? And that's the community work, is to take those things that are vulnerable and have them say, well, what's an alternative story that we can live into now that isn't burdened by, and usually it's a deficiency-minded. Even when we describe a human being, and we all have taken the Myers-Briggs and all these things, and we were just talking, I'm an INFJ. I don't know if it's still true, but I'm standing by it, especially since I can't remember what the initials mean. But I know there's certain kind of people who have an easier time. And so all that doesn't explain free will. So in all the understandings we have about what constitutes a human being. And so the healing work you're doing organizationally is to help people have more choices with their life, about their health, about each other. So all of this is a methodology for moving towards an alternative story that begins with, what's the crossroads you're at this stage of your life? And the crossroads question is useful because it honors the fact that you have a choice. No matter what got you here, you have a choice. Life is not a Disney movie. It's not an upward movement to the North Star. And so these are all little pieces of that. So all transformation is linguistic. So part of your role is to say, how do we engage in a different conversation? Especially with people at odds with each other. If you're in high conflict situations, you especially need to help them get connected. And that becomes the work in your world, our world, tough work. I want to do one more thing with you, and that is do the gift conversation. So the alternative to deficiencies, what's wrong with you? Every time I have feedback for you and tell you how I can help improve you, it's an act of colonization. The notion that I have something in mind for you was the argument for England taking over India. We're just here to be helpful. We're here to, America's economic colonization, called globalization, is just saying we're here to be helpful. Would you please live into our cultural values? And so it's a marketing of consumerism. So you're trying to be with each other in a non-colonial way. So let the deficiencies go, and you say, well, what are the gifts? What are we good at? A friend of mine, educator, she said, I want every young person, 18-year-old in the state of Ohio, to know what they're good at. I don't care what grades they got, I mean, we've gone crazy with schools. You think your world is complicated, the core curriculum, STEMs, and all that kind of stuff. And so you say the alternative is to confront each other with our gifts. So that's what I'd like you to do with this last conversation with the 2 or 3 people you've been talking. I want you to say, here's 1 or 2 things you did in this short little conversation among strangers that was useful to me, that touched me in some way. Just like you said already, that was a beautiful statement you made, that what she meant to you. And do that with each other. Now, if somebody says something nice to you, just say, thank you, I like hearing that. Okay, this is the methodology. You guys are you love methodology. You cut, you sew, you do all kinds of crazy things, okay? And so this is, just say, thank you, I like hearing that. Don't tell your little story. Don't say, well, you brought it out of me. Don't give me that, yeah, I brought it out. That's escaping accountability. The toughest thing is to confront people with their gifts, and people defend against it because they don't want to be accountable for bringing them into the world. When you tell me my deficiencies, I can handle that because it tells me what I can't handle. I can deal with the deficiencies. And usually deficiency conversations, just people are irritated with you. You know, most people ask, Peter, would you like some feedback? And lately I've been saying no. Because I know you're irritated. You know, I don't mind if you're mad at me, be mad at me, but don't package it as help. It's like a double indemnity. Now, I not only have to deal with the fact you're mad at me, but I have to act grateful. Just be mad at me. Same with people that you work with. And so the gift conversation becomes a way to complete your time together. So do that now. We've got about 4 minutes. And then somebody says something nice to you, say, thank you, I like hearing that. And if you're feeling brave, say, tell me more. Now, that will never happen in this country, but I'm trying and trying and trying. Oh, we do that now, 5 minutes, and then we'll have a strong close, or not. So let me, I don't know, can you hear me better from here? Not really? 'Cause I don't like it up there. Let me ask you to stop, clap once. You can hear my voice. Clap twice. Awesome. So I could ask you any things strike you about that conversation. Now, when you ask these questions, okay, what's crossroads you're at? A bunch of good questions. What do you want to say no to? Dissent. There's nothing that builds commitment better than a dissent conversation, especially if you agree you don't have to explain yourself or justify anything. So people defending themselves is just a waste of energy. It just creates distance. So if you ask people, what do you want to say no to? What's the yes you've been what's the no you've been postponing? Beautiful question. What's the yes you no longer mean? Beautiful question. If you really want to get gruesome, you say, what's the resentment you have that nobody knows about? But don't use that at home, okay? And so these conversations engage people. They get us connected and create a context within which. And the same with now sometimes people don't want to answer the question. So there's got to be room for pass. So every time you break people in a small group, you say, if you don't want to answer this question, it's fine. But don't go anywhere. See, in a patriarchal world, if you don't answer the question, you're a traitor. You're a non-performer. Well, I want to create space for people who have nothing to say at the moment. I know that it's not true. Everybody has something to say. The other thing the small group does, it keeps the large group from going berserk. Because sometimes you line up little stands and put a microphone there, and people make the same speech they've been making for the last 30 years. So in the community where I don't want to create a setting where the extremes have a loud voice. I don't want to be controlled. And that's the challenge with the news in the States anyway, is we think if you get a crazy person on the left and a crazy person on the right, it's called balanced reporting. It's double neurosis reporting. Why? Because it grabs attention. And so it's a celebrity game. It's not a news thing. And you're more reasonable about that. And then the small group becomes a metaphor for how I want the larger world to operate. You say, how do I change the world? Give me a break. You know, it's above my pay grade. How do I large system? You don't have to worry about that. You say in your unit, your department, your clinic, whatever you're doing, you say this is going to be a metaphor, an example of how I want the larger world to operate. And then the leap to scale is an act of God. That if what you're doing, moment has come, 1,000 other people will be doing it at the same time and you won't even know about it. Because the organism, the body, and we don't know much about community or the communal, we're so focused on the individual, has a sense of itself. I know that if I ask 6 people in a group of 350, what struck you about the conversation you'd had? The 4 answers we get will cover 90% of the room. And so that reminds me, and so that's the way of thinking about it, as an antidote to your own exhaustion. And mostly exhaustion comes from some imbalanced carrier of our relationship. That's why you're so tired. And you say, well, let me just do in this small space that I can control, a small version of the large world. Now, at the end of the day, which some of us are getting near, and you add it all up over a long period of time, did you change the world? And the answer is, of course, not. But what you did, maybe it was enough. Maybe you pay back the bill. I had this question that haunted me for decades. And the question was, what's the question that if you had an answer to would set you free? And what's the question for me that if I had an answer to would set me free? And I finally, a while ago, realized that at the moment of birth, we're presented an invoice and said, because I've given you life, you owe something back. Now, everybody doesn't feel that way. I do. I don't know, being a Jew or whatever it is. Everybody's got a story, of course. And so my thought was, well, have I paid my debt? And so you don't have to use outcomes in the world to do that, because what you're taking on as a goal, as a longing, as a dream, as a vision is essentially you'll do everything you can, and you'll have done what you can. And because there's always going to be some suffering in the world. Anyway, thank you for doing what you do in the world. I wish maybe I will move here. I'm in that line to move up here. And anyway, God bless you. Thanks very much.